So I'm just going to fast forward to blue hour and you watch what happens. And welcome to blue hour. Okay, so as you can see now, still no cloud, but look how much colour we've got. Our exposure for our sky, and we've got our exposure for our foreground. And what we're going to do is we're just going to do a very subtle blend, and then I'm just going to press Control or Command and I, the letter I for invert, and just like that, it's blacked out the brightest parts of the image. Hello, and welcome to 2025. So thank you to everyone who has liked, subscribed, watched. Okay, it's really enjoying the YouTube process. So thank you to everyone who is in here watching this video now. And today's going to be all about making something out of nothing. And as you can see from the sky, blue sky, okay? Absolutely nothing happening in the sky. Even over where the sun's setting, there's no cloud, so we're not going to get an epic sunset. So these are days where I always have a plan B, and my plan B is always to have some sort of foreground interest. So if we don't get that epic sky, at least we've got something nice to take some photographs of. Okay, so what I'm going to do is spin you around and show you what I've got, because I've got a real little treat here. Been hunting around for about half an hour, and I've found something that I really like. So I'm going to spin you around and just show you. Have a look at what I've got going on here, okay? Forget the sky, look at that foreground. Okay, so the tide's just low enough that we've got some sand coming out of the water. We've got some golden light on the sand. The sun is off to the left of the shot, okay? So I don't want to be shooting into the sun when it's up high. So we're going to get some nice side light. We're going to get some golds, some greens and some blues, but it's all about this foreground, okay? And look at that, that is epic. So I don't want to walk through my scene. I don't want to get footprints through this. So I'm going to keep it all nice and clean. Okay, so I've got the GoPro set up just over here, so we'll flip over to the GoPro. That'll give you an idea of how close we are to these trees. So I would say we're a good 10 meters away from these trees. So as far as focus goes, again, I'm going to focus on the horizon. Stick with it because I'll show the editing at the end of this video, and I'll show you that even if we focus on the horizon, those trees will be pin sharp, okay? Because our depth of field, we're a long way away from our subject, okay? So our depth of field will be fine. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is switch into autofocus. I'm just going to focus on my horizon, okay? And then I'm switching back to manual focus. So that way I can keep pressing the shutter and it's not going to keep trying to autofocus all the time, okay? And we're far enough away that focusing on infinity is fine, okay? Our depth of field is fine. Okay, so another thing to note, it's quite windy, so I want a fast shutter speed to freeze that wind blowing the leaves. Okay, so f8's around about where we want to be. ISO at 100, f8, and all I'm doing is changing my shutter speed to either brighten or darken the image. Okay, now, as you can see, because we're shooting into the sun, our histogram is clipping to the right. Okay, we're going to blow highlights if we shoot into the sun. So what I'm going to do is frame it up so that sun isn't in my shot, and I'll show you the difference. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I don't want to get too close to those trees, so I'm just going to zoom in a little bit until that sun's out of my shot. Okay, so I've zoomed in probably to around about 20 mil, just to get that sun out of my shot, and look at my highlights. So there's shooting into the sun, highlights are blown, and just by getting that sun slightly out of the frame, okay, now our highlights are perfectly under control, which is where I sort of want to be. I don't want to recompose, because if I move off to the left or the right, our trees aren't going to line up. So in this case, I am just literally zooming in to get that sun out of my shot. And I'm just going to frame everything up around about there. Okay, and then I'm going to focus on our foreground because our sky is doing nothing, and that's going to be my shot. Okay, so now all I'm going to do is get down nice and low, just to get some leading light. We've got these really nice patterns in the sand, so they're going to add as not foreground interest, just as leading lines. Okay, they're going to be blurry because I've focused on the horizon, but they don't need to be super sharp. Okay, we don't need to focus stack. Okay, and all I'm doing is working with those little lines in the sand. So this is what I mean by skies are relevant. Look what we've got as our foreground. Okay, so we're starting to lose light now, and I'm going to wait until blue hour. So I'm just going to fast forward to blue hour and you watch what happens. And welcome to blue hour. Okay, so as you can see now, still no cloud, but look how much color we've got. Okay, now we've got that orange, the purple, the blue. We've got some really nice colors. Now, our biggest issue here, the wind is strong. The wind is really strong, but I'm going to have to use slower shutter speeds But what I'll do is I'll crank up the ISO. When it comes to the editing, I'll show you about high ISOs. We'll lose a bit of dynamic range. So we'll have a bit of a play around now that it's blue hour. Let's get some shots. Okay, so here's the back of the camera. And as you can see, that just looks absolutely epic now that we're into blue hour. But as you can see, my shutter speed is down at 1 second. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to crank up my ISO. Let's go all the way up to 1600. So now, keep my shutter speed. We're going to shoot at f8, get as much light in as we can. Okay, and I'm going to crank up my shutter speed to a 15th of a second. Okay, so 15th of a second should do a better job. So that's it. Now off to the editing studio. Okay, time for the editing side of things. Now I'll quickly show you some of the raw files. Okay, so I've ended up with 38 photos and they're all very similar. Okay, because what I like to do is just change my foreground up a bit, working with those patterns in the water. Again, I don't have an articulated screen, so I can't kind of compose the shot as well as if I had an articulated screen. So I just take lots of shots and try from different angles to get our patterns in the water, in the foreground, kind of leading our eye out towards our subject. Okay, at the same time, I'm keeping our main subject is these trees, trying to keep them composed so they're all separate and they're not crossing over each other. So I've taken a few shots there, just sort of playing around with different angles. And what I've done is I've selected a few that I'm going to edit. Okay, so as you can see, yeah, there's lots that are very similar. And that's what I do, like take lots of photos from slightly different angles to get different images. Okay, and as you can see, they're all slightly different. Okay, little variations on each image. And then eventually we get into the blue hour. And these are the raw files, and look how much color we have there. So what I'm going to do is do a very quick and basic edit and just give you some ideas of how to process a very flat, boring sky like this and how to add a little bit of color to it. What I'm going to do now, this isn't a workflow by any means. This isn't going to be how to edit your images. This is all about just giving you some ideas on how to process images. Okay, so just take little bits and pieces. I'm not saying this is how to do it. I'm just going to give you some ideas on some of the tools that we can use and how to actually, boost our colors a little bit so we can just make the image look a little bit nicer. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to change our profile to Adobe Landscape. And that's just going to boost our color a little bit, give us a little bit of dynamic range. We're going to bring our highlights down by around about 50%. I don't like to push my highlights too far. Lift my shadows by about 50%. Going to take my whites down and bring my blacks up. Okay, now there's method to that madness, so stick with me because we will introduce blacks and whites later. For starters, I want to get the image as flat as I possibly can with as much dynamic range as I possibly can. Okay, so that's my basic starting point. If we have a look at our before and after, so just backslash on the keyboard, will show you your before and then your after. Okay, so now that's starting to look a lot more like the way I saw it with my own eyes. You look at a raw file, okay, a raw file is an unprocessed, it's unprocessed data. It's not a photograph, it's unprocessed data. Okay, so a raw file, never think that a raw file is a photo, okay? It's just simply unprocessed data. So what we need to do is we need to process that image or develop that raw file to make it look more like how we saw it, okay? And to my eye, that is a lot closer than that. Okay, so that's my starting point. Another thing I like to do is come down to my lens correction, remove chromatic aberration, and lens profile. Do this with pretty much every image. Now, I know for a fact that with this camera lens combination, I don't like the way it removes the vignetting around the edge. Okay, it's a bit too aggressive for my liking. And again, that's a camera lens combination, so it's something that you'll need to find for yourself. But what I'm going to do is actually introduce some of that vignetting back. If I take this all the way, okay, now it's a lot more like the original image. Okay, all it's doing is straightening our horizon and getting rid of that barrel distortion. Okay, so I'm just going to dial it back just a little bit. Okay, so again, this will be camera lens dependent, so everyone's going to be different. So have a bit of a play around. I do like to have a bit of vignetting around my images. So there's a good starting point. Okay, so now if we look at our before and after, okay, we're getting there. We're starting to get somewhere. But what we want to do, I'm actually going to over-process this image to give you ideas on what you can do to really, boost a fairly flat image. Okay, our subject is perfect. I love our foreground. Now, in the video, I mentioned about focusing on infinity. So if I zoom in, okay, I can see those radio towers in the background. So I don't know how well the YouTube compression will go, but I can literally see those radio towers quite clearly. And if we have a look at our subject, that's pin sharp as well. Okay, so by focusing on infinity, not too close to our subject, okay, our depth of field is fine. Like, yes, right in front of our camera is going to be out of focus, but that was the look I was going for. I wanted this to be out of focus because I don't want that to distract our eye. I want it more to be there as a leading line towards our subject. Okay, if we focus stack and we make this super sharp, it takes away a little bit from, our subject. Okay, this is all about the subject. It's not about the sky. It's not about the immediate foreground. It's all about our subject, and that's the star of the show. Okay, so we don't need to overpower our image with too much detail. The other thing that is kind of annoying me about this is we've got too much sky. So in this case, a panorama will look quite nice. I don't like this little white cloud up here, but we'll leave it there for now. So too much sky. The sky's boring. We don't need all that sky in our shot. Okay. If I've got another image here where I have more foreground, so that's a little bit better balanced, but we'll get to that soon. This one here, yep. If you have a boring sky, get rid of it. Okay, and just have your interest. So in this case, somewhere around about there is looking a lot nicer. Okay. Now, what we're going to do now is we're actually going to, let's edit this image. Okay, so look, honestly, it doesn't need a lot of editing, and you'll hear me say that a lot. A good photo is a good photo. You don't need to edit it too much. But, we're doing an editing video, so let's edit. And I'll just give you some ideas of things that you can do just to boost it up a little bit. So first thing I want to do is I really want to emphasize this orange glow along the horizon. So what I'm going to do is go over to my masking tools, and I'm just going to select a radial gradient. Okay, radial gradient, and then if we just click and drag, and I'm just kind of bringing that along the horizon, so somewhere around about there. Have your feathering, I would even go up to 100% with your feathering, okay, and we just want it to cover the horizon. And what we're going to do is if we go down to our color temperature, okay, so the color tab, temperature, and we're just going to warm it up, and that's going to start to bring some color back in. Okay, now I highly recommend you do not crank it up anywhere near 100%. Subtle is good, okay, so somewhere around about 20. For the sake of YouTube, I'm going to overdo it. I'm going to overdo it just to show you what we can do. Again, this isn't how to edit your image. This is to show you some ideas on how to edit your image. Take what you will. I'm just going to give you some ideas. Okay, so we're going to emphasize that glow on the horizon by bringing that up a little bit. Add a little bit of magenta to it just to give it a bit more of an orange glow. So somewhere around about there looks nice. Now, another thing I want to do is really make this sky blue. Okay, again, we're going to just really edit this image. So what I'm going to do is grab another mask, and this time I'm going to grab a linear gradient. And I'm just going to bring my linear gradient down. I'm going to kind of follow where that blue is. Okay, I don't want to eat away into the orange or the yellow that I've just introduced. So I'm just going to bring that down to around about there. So I'm just covering the blue. And same with the temperature slider, if we take that down, okay, now we're starting to add some blue into our sky. Again, don't push your sliders too far, okay, keep it subtle, okay, we just want to add a little bit of blue into our sky. Okay, so now we're starting to introduce color into what was a very flat image. So again, before and after. Okay, so now, we're starting to get somewhere. We're adding a little bit of color into our image and just making it look a little bit nicer. Okay, now another thing that's annoying me with this, we've got our eyes always drawn to the brightest parts of an image, and I find myself keep looking down at this corner. Now, as far as composition goes, it would have been nice to have something in this corner similar to what we've got here. But again, it's one of those things, without an articulated screen, I'm making excuses, and you know, that happens. If you can't see what you're doing, you're sort of just holding the camera down and trying to get a shot. But that corner, what we're going to do is we're going to just remove some of the brightness out of this corner to take our eye back up into the frame, okay? Because our eye is going to wander to the brightest parts of the frame. So what I'm going to do is grab another filter, and this time we're going to grab another linear gradient, and this time I'm just going to bring it up from this corner, so somewhere around about there. Okay, and what I want to do is just darken this corner. So a couple of ways we can do it. Number one, we can bring down our exposure, or we can just add contrast. Adding contrast is a good one too. Okay, so I'm just going to do a little bit of both. Okay, so now we've sort of, you know, our eye isn't wandering out of the frame. Okay, so that's a good way of just, if you've got areas that are too bright, just darken them down, because, you know, our eye does want to go to these trees. Up here we could probably even deal with that corner as well. So now before and after. Okay, so now we're starting to get somewhere. It's starting to look nice. Now this is where I'm going to show you a really cool blending technique, but this has to be done in Photoshop. Okay, Lightroom is fine for editing single images, but what we want to do is we're just going to boost this sky. We're going to really amplify this sky, and we're going to bring out some more detail in these trees. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase my exposure to somewhere around about 1 stop. All I'm really looking at is these trees at the moment. I want to try and get some of that green to come out in our blend. So I'm going to increase that by about 1 stop, make it nice and bright. And then I'm going to right click, edit in, and edit in Photoshop. Okay, now we've got our image opened in Photoshop. What I'm going to do is go back to Lightroom, back to this image again, and this time I'm going to go the other way. I'm actually going to bring it down, and I'm going to add some contrast just to boost the sky. So now all I'm looking at is the sky, and now we're going to open that in Photoshop, edit in Photoshop. So essentially we've created 2 exposures. Okay, we've got our exposure for our sky, and we've got our exposure for our foreground. And what we're going to do is we're just going to do a very subtle blend, and we're going to bring in some of this overdone sky. So I'm just going to, with the move tool, I'm going to click and drag. If you hold your shift key and then click and drag, it'll place it directly over the top. So now we can close this image. We don't need that anymore. We've got our 2 layers. Now for this to work, what we want is a brighter layer on top. So what I tend to do is select my brighter layer and just press Control or Command and J, and that will make a copy. And then I'm going to click and drag and place our brighter exposure on top. Okay, we can unlock it, but for the sake of this video, it's just easier to have that layer there twice. It'll make more sense once I start to do it. So what we want to do is we want to start to bring in some of this sky into this image. And this is a little spin on my normal exposure blending technique, luminosity masking. But watch this. What we're going to do is we're going to create a layer mask. With the layer mask still selected, I'm going to go to Channels. I'm going to hold my Control or Command button and select RGB. Then I'm going to go back to Layers. And then I'm just going to press Control or Command and I, the letter I for invert. And just like that, it's blacked out the brightest parts of the image. Okay, so no need to paint, no need to use the brush tool. Okay, and then if we press Control or Command and D, that will deselect our marching ants. And now look at that, if I just hide our sky layer, as you can see, it's kept all the detail in our leaves. Okay, and it's just sort of boosted the sky a little bit for us. Okay, now that's completely overdone. So what I'm going to do now is select that sky layer that I've got. I'm just going to bring the opacity down and then slowly bring it up just until it looks a little bit more natural. Okay, so somewhere around about there, 40%. We're just adding a little bit of that color back into the sky while still retaining all the detail in our leaves. Okay, so that's a really cool little tip, and that's something you can't do in Lightroom yet. I know Lightroom does have its luminance range, but I don't like it. I just don't think it does a great job. Here we get, you know, we're working with layers. We can actually control our opacity and we can bring it up and down. If we want to mask out some, we can grab our masking tool, okay, and just want to bring back some of that darkness in our foreground just by using a brush. I'll turn that up to 100%, okay, and we want to black out all of that bottom bit to show our original image underneath, okay, and maybe even the sky a little bit. So then we're just sort of affecting the middle of the image. Okay, then we can go up to layer, flatten image. Okay, now we've got a nicer looking image. We've brought plenty of detail back into it. It's just looking nicer. Okay, and as a final step, final thing that I'm going to do is go to my levels. So down in the bottom right hand corner, this little tab down here, we're going to do a levels adjustment, and I'm just going to check my white point. I'm going to bring my white point up until it actually gets to the white, and I'll bring my black point in, okay, and that's just going to add a little bit of contrast, just give it a little bit more pop, and that's about it. That's all I really need to do to that image. Okay, and honestly, I don't even need to do that much. That's just to sort of give you some ideas of what you can do. And then finally, if we just go up to File and Save, okay, that's going to save it in Lightroom. So when we go back to Lightroom, now we can see our original image, which I'm going to reset, and then that's where we've taken it. Okay, so a very easy and effective way of just adding some color in, adding a bit of vignetting, some contrast, and taking a very flat raw file and just making it look a little bit nicer. Okay. Next image, very, very similar to what we just did. In fact, I don't think I will, it's the same process, okay? But this one here, we have more foreground, okay? So I'm going to do very similar to what I did before. This time I am going to use my preset, which is kind of what I just did on the previous image. Now, if anything, with this one, I do remember that golden glow on the sand. So I'm just going to warm it up a little bit, add a little bit of warmth to it, and we can do exactly what we did before. Okay, so we can grab our radial gradient and we can add some more orange into this area, really boost that up. Okay, add a little bit of magenta to make it a bit more orange. Create a new mask, grab a linear gradient, bring that down from our top corner. Again, just reduce our temperature to get some blue back into that sky. Okay, and even with this image would work with some contrast. I'm just going to bump up the contrast a little bit. And as you can see, it just boosts the color. Okay, contrast, be careful with contrast. It does boost color. If you want to just selectively do your contrast, another filter is good. So create a new mask, grab a linear gradient. And if we just, again, we're going to bring it up from this corner. I'm just going to darken down that corner a little bit and then boost our contrast. Okay, so now we're starting to really enhance our foreground to make it look a little bit more interesting. Okay, and again, before and after. Okay, so that's looking a lot more how my eyes saw it. That is nothing like how I saw it on the day. Okay, so just with a few very basic adjustments, we've just brought our image a little bit more to life. Okay, so that's sort of some very basic tools for Lightroom, and they will work with most, especially when you've got a boring sky. If we've got cloud, completely different. Okay, this was a very flat, boring sky. Okay, but more importantly, it's all about foreground. It's all about getting this foreground nice and interesting to make our image look a little bit nicer. Okay, this one here, if anything, if I'm being fussy, I would crop it. Okay, there's too much sky again. So probably somewhere in, really enhance that foreground. Okay, we don't need all that sky of nothingness up there. So just enhance our foreground a little bit. Now onto our blue hour shots. Now these are the ones where ISO, okay, so what I've done, this was shot at ISO 100, and as you can see, my shutter speed's down at 1/8 of a second. So it's almost at 1 second, and because it was super windy, look at all that movement in the leaves, okay, lots of movement. Don't even think of exposure blending when you've got this much movement, okay? Because trying to blend anything that's moving this much is an absolute nightmare. This is one of the rare cases where I will actually bump my ISO to get a fast shutter speed to freeze movement, okay? So this one was shot at 1/15 of a second. And a 15th of a second is fast enough to, eliminate most movement, especially in leaves, water, things like that. Where we have a look at this one at almost 1 second, okay, it just looks blurry, it looks messy, it's not really nice. Okay, where this one here, that's shot at ISO 1600, nice and clean. So even with a little bit of noise, this is where the Lightroom denoise function is absolutely brilliant and can really save those high ISO images. So I'll just apply that and we'll have a look at how it looks. Okay, so for an image like this, I find 50% is fine, okay? If your image is really noisy, you might want to crank it up a bit more, but 50% kind of works quite well. And we're just going to hit Enhance. Okay, so now it's created our DNG file. Okay, so, and you'll see it down in the bottom corner, it will say Enhanced NRDNG. Okay, so it's essentially a raw file with the noise reduction applied. And look, the Lightroom denoise, it really is good. Give it a try, it will really clean up those images for you. Now, if you remember from the video, I deliberately underexposed to preserve all that highlight detail, because I know that I can start to lift our shadows a little bit. And this time of night, it's not about the shadow detail. Okay, this time of night, it is a silhouette. That's what I was going for. I was going for that silhouette with our nice sky. But we want to just bring back a little bit of that shadow detail without going too far. Okay, it's dark, it's supposed to be a silhouette. So what we're going to do, similar to before, I'm going to change my Adobe landscape and look at the difference that makes already. Again, exactly the same as before. Bring down my highlights a little bit. That'll bring back some of this detail in the sky. Lift our shadows. Again, I don't like to lift my shadows too much. 50% is fine. I'm going to take down my whites again and lift my blacks again. Okay, and now we're starting to get somewhere there. There's the raw file. And as you can see, it's just a subtle difference, but it's enough to start to bring out some of that shadow detail. Just tone down that really bright sky, get some color back in it. And that's a raw file, okay? We don't really, I very rarely touch vibrance or saturation. If anything, with this one, we can boost our contrast a little bit, okay? Because it is a silhouette type image. We want it to look like a silhouette. Okay, if you wanted to bring up your exposure, again, it's all personal preference where you want your image. For me, somewhere around about there. Again, it's one of those images you don't need to do a lot to, okay? Just some very basic adjustments, and that's about it. I'm all about just capture as much detail as you can in camera, get it as nice as you can in camera, and then you don't have to do a lot of editing to your image. Just some simple adjustments is all we really need. So if you did like it, please leave a like. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. I'll be back out doing live streams again very soon. I haven't done a live stream this year, so really keen to do another one. I might even go back out to this location. The tides might sort of dictate that, but yeah, thank you again for watching. And hopefully next time I see you, I will be out live.